I welcome you all to this presentation of this 60th edition of the International Art Exhibition of La Biennale di Venezia. I am Cristiana Costanzo. I'm in charge of the press office of the Visual Arts and Architecture Department of La Biennale di Venezia. Sitting beside me, I have Adriano Pedrosa, the curator of this year's edition and the artistic director of the Museo de Arte de São Paulo in Brazil. I invite on stage the president of La Biennale di Venezia, Pietrangelo Buttafuoco. How did we get to this point? We cannot pretend to be a silent guest, what we are in our heart. The question is, how did we get to this point? I'm bringing you into a well-precise situation. Helmut Kohl, François Mitterrand, hand in hand, in the Black Forest, were paying tribute to the last soldier who was appointed with the Iron Cross, who also wrote a book that is an indication that is the future, and the word is peace. And peace, his book, brings as a subtitle a word to young people in Europe and in the world. And the word is peace. The author was Ernest Junger. He was awarded the Iron Cross, and Kohl and Mitterrand gave him the symbol of the peacemaking after a war that never ended among the two peoples of France and Germany, and they were hand in hand to pay tribute to the last soldier whose word for destiny was peace. 2025, next year, all of us will be asked to take a distance from 1795, the year when Perpetual Peace was published by Immanuel Kant. And who knows next year where will we be? Who knows what safeguarding clause, this is what Immanuel Kant refers to, safeguarding clause will we use to make up for the damage of what we host in our soul today. We cannot find peace for having lost our duty to build peace. When arrived at this point, we already know we cannot build on the work of Giorgio La Pira, who in Florence summoned from all over the world his enemies, the enemies, to try and build a dialogue. How did we get to this point? If Pio La Torre, a martyr, celebrated in the Parliament of the Italian Republic today, would have no voice for certain, he would be considered, because of his fight for peace, as an enemy. and therefore, dear Adriano, he would be pointed at as an internal enemy at the service of the stranger, of the foreigner. Dear Christiana, dear friends, we cannot pretend we do not know. And today, the 60th edition of the International Art Exhibition, finding its title, Foreigners Everywhere, Stranieri Ovunque, this unknown, this feeling of the unknown, well, it brings us to contemporary times and forces us to stop with the international approach, because contemporary gives way to here and now in something that is not an event. What we are really concerned about is the future. And the international, let us reflect on this word. Let us observe it. What is it? It is like a forgotten decoration in the drawer of a piece of furniture that is obsolete, as we do not have a different horizon, if not the universal. And it is clear sign of what Adriano Pedrosa, inviting in Venice, the only city in the world where each stranger, each foreigner can find a home. Inviting in Venice, I was saying, the forgotten geographies, the return to res extensa, a pluralistic reverberation of a beauty that would be otherwise forgotten, excluded, cancelled. Well, we thank Adriano Pedrosa. In his work, many of you have already had the chance to visit the exhibition, I think. You can find in his work the compass that allows us to interpret the paradigm we are called to discuss, which is not that of an era of change, but a change in time. And Pedrosa, in his work, he, a Latin American curator, who knows very well the compass function, well, he knows that these forms have been anthropized. The north is leading the way with its toilette, and the south, possibly barefoot, follows by. Being a foreigner among foreigners, barefoot, we find the wanderer who follows the different the different streets, hiding the presence of a god among his beggar's dress, something that gives origin to a renovation of our history. Aeneas, abandoning the fire of Troy to found, he, a stranger, the civilization of universal, where nobody is a barbarian any longer, but rather a citizen. And this is the privilege guiding the selection of artists, the privilege we have to follow, a meaning that goes beyond our contemporary times and brings us to the future, a future that can be a root, a deep root, what we recognize in men meeting people, people recognizing their own humanity. Also, and here the metaphor brings us to chewing, even eating, by eating other people. And it is very nice that in this exhibition, the term abaporu, which in the Tupi language means the man who eats people, is so important, and it is eating that constitutes for a very root of civilization. And we find a familiar code that brings us back to two different interpretations of the divine, two beautiful ideas that show us innocence, that stimulates that appetite. The first is the son of a god that originated, was born from the thigh of his father Zeus, and it is Dionysus. And the other, the son of Mary, the chosen one, is Jesus, whose innocence brings us back to the Eucharistically known as the host, the liturgy, a presence in the rite and the embodiment of food, food for all. It is so nice that threads that seem to be far apart, forgotten geographies, come together. It is extraordinary how in the labor of art we can bring everything to a dimension in which strange, extraneating, disquieting is at the same time nourishment and lymph. And it is surprising that the city that for 129 years has been organizing this international art exhibition can renew its commitment. And there is this coincidence of the 700th anniversary of the death of Marco Polo, whose curiosity brought him to visit cultures that are felt as far apart and that instead are close to us in many ways. In greeting and thanking Adriano Pedrosa for opening this chapter that goes beyond the exhibition and is a matter for a thorough reflection for all of us, also in political terms, I also want to thank the 87 participating countries, the 4 countries who are here, that are here for the first time. Allow me to list them one after the other. The Republic of Benin, Ethiopia, the United Republic of Timor-Leste, and the United Republic of Tanzania. We thank all the non-profit national and international bodies that organize the 30 collateral events in the city, the Ministry of Culture, the regional institutions that in different ways support La Biennale, the city of Venice, the region Veneto, di Sovrintendenza Archeologica, Belle Arti e Paesaggio per il Comune di Venezia e Laguna, and the Italian Navy. Allow me to thank the partner of this event, Swatch, the main sponsor of this exhibition, Illy Café, and to the sponsor, American Express, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and Vela Venezia Unica. I want to thank RAI, media partner of this 60th exhibition, and that has been following this exhibition with a special broadcast both on TV and on the radio and on the web. I want to thank our donors, the international councils and organizations that are essential for the creation for the 60th exhibition. Again, I want to thank Adriano Pedrosa and all his team. And my profound gratitude goes to my predecessor, my accomplice, my friend and master, Roberto Cicutto, from whose wise words I've profited and will try not to disperse his experience. I want to thank the whole team of La Biennale di Venezia. That is a living testimony for me of the critical spirit, of imagination, and of the power of visual language. But the question remains, how did we get to this point? You see, I am asking this to Adriano Pedrosa. The essence of a work of art lies in its being at the surface of the truth. And it is the truth itself that starts acting in the works of art. This is a pipe. You know the pipe. There is a pipe, but this is not a pipe. We cannot pretend that nothing happened. And if this is not a pipe, totally, in the absolute of truth, what it is not, it is pipe. The Israeli pavilion that decides not to open 2 times as much, totally in the absolute of truth, is reversing the extreme act chosen by the artist, reverses the gesture of the artist at the service of truth, ceasefire, and the freeing of the hostages. And to say this with Magritte, this is not a pavilion, it is an act of art. It is genius of art that can find a response. And remaining in this opening words, dear Adriano, dear friends, this is not La Biennale. In times of war, it is necessary and it is urgent that the wise, the artists, the aristocracy of thought join together to face the catastrophe, meeting, talking, discussing. And I take upon myself this responsibility. And I go on saying that this that is not a pipe is a tool for peace. It is the place where we can measure the proximity among peoples, among cultures and religions, and also the differences. But how did we come to this point? I will tell you about ice cream, without forgetting that in this beautiful city in San Giorgio, Fondazione Cini, the Americans and the Soviets were meeting in order to avoid a war that, should we have it today, could only be a catastrophe. I will tell you about the ice cream, and this is not a pipe, but this that is not a pipe, La Biennale, I take upon myself the responsibility, should become the point of junction where we can put together the rays of the same light. I am telling you about the ice cream, but let us not forget the shame of the universities where Paolo Nori's course was subjected to censorship, a course on Dostoevsky. We should not boycott anybody. And allow me to tell you about the ice cream. The Lebanon, in Beirut, there was once a preacher, Imam Huma Sadr. He was listened to, adored. He was a kind of Gandhi of that country. He collected the vibrant presence of the spirit, of the feeling that is peace at the time of a terrible war that is still raging there, and that we cannot pretend it does not exist. On those days, during the fights and the massacres, an epidemic started. In Beirut, a nice seller was extremely loved by the people. He was a Christian, a Maronite Christian. He made very good ice creams. But you know what hatred is, you know what lie is, you know what we still experience, propaganda. a suspect started circulating that he had spread the epidemic, that it was the responsible for that epidemic, and that feeling started to develop against foreigners, against foreign communities. And the tension rose so much that during a Friday of preach, Mossa Sadr, in his prayer of the Friday afternoon, sent his warning together with his words. And when everybody was so moved by his words, by peace he was talking about, at the end of his sermon, he told to everybody, and now let us all go and have an ice cream. And he led all of the listeners to the ice cream shop of that man to repair for the damage that had been done, with the full awareness of a foreigner can find a home in the community made by all of us. So let us all go and get an ice cream together.
Grazie, Presidente. Passo
Thank you, President. The floor now to Adriano Pedrosa, the curator of this 60th International Art Exhibition. Buongiorno, buon dia. Grazie a tutti. Grazie, Presidente Buttafuoco, per la sua presentazione.
I want to start by, in fact, thanking a small number of people among so many people that have worked, invested, and supported so much in this extraordinary exhibition. First of all, of course, the artists, both living and no longer living, but particularly all the artists that have made new works for the exhibition. It's really quite extraordinary to count on their support and all their work for this project. I cannot be more grateful for their participation. I would also like to thank former President Roberto Cicuto, who appointed me in December 2022 for this task. I would also like to thank the entire team of the Biennale, and I mention Andrea Del Mercato, General Director, and Johan Brandmeier, responsible head of the Visual Arts and Architecture sector, who oversees the management of this exhibition. Thanks, of course, to Cristiana Constanzo and all her team as well, who have worked with me in the relationships with the press. I want to mention two individuals who led the very complex installation process, the teams of Elena Lema and Diana Leoni. It's really wonderful to count on their work, putting together and setting up the entire exhibition. I also want to thank very specially my own curatorial team, the curators team, Amanda Carneiro and Sofia Gocci, who are the two artistic organizers working closely with me in the curatorial research and putting together the exhibition, as well as Juliana Zibil, the architect, and the graphic designers, Paula Chinoco, Carolina Borriagi, and Roderico Souza from Estúdio Campo in São Paulo. Many thanks also to all the lenders, to all the donors, very special donors, and the sponsors and the national councils, Without their support, this exhibition would not be possible. I hope to have an ice cream with them later on. So this is a quite extraordinary journey, the Biennale di Venezia, which started in December 2002. As you know, the title of the exhibition has a double linguistic presence, stranieri ovunque and foreigners everywhere. I did want to stress the linguistic aspect and calling attention to translation in this particular work. The work of the title, as you may know, is drawn from a series of works by a collective, Clairefontaine, a man and a woman living in Palermo, and they have been making these series of neon sculptures, which today comprise some 60 sculptures since 2005. The expression foreigners everywhere, in turn, is appropriated by them from a collective, a political activist collective that in the beginning of the 2000s in Torino here in Italy were fighting racism and xenophobia in the country, right? So this is the starting point of the exhibition, the idea of foreigners everywhere and stranieri ovunque. The expression itself has many different meanings that we can't even predict. I was just introduced to another one here by a colleague of ours. But there are a few meanings that I call attention to. First of all, that wherever you go, wherever you are surrounded by foreigners. Also, that wherever you go, you are always deep down inside a foreigner yourself. The expression takes special meaning also here in Venice, not only in the city, because the population becomes 3 times as larger due to influx of tourists, a foreigner of a very privileged kind in peak days during the holidays. But also the Biennale itself has always been a celebration of the foreigner and with its international outlook, you know? And it's wonderful to see how many countries, a record number of countries, 87 countries, are participating with national pavilions, including 4 new countries, Tanzania, Benin, Ethiopia, and Timor-Leste. The exhibition, perhaps many of you have visited the exhibition already. The exhibition includes over 330 artists from 80 countries. I have divided it into 2 main sections, the Núcleo Storico and the Núcleo Contemporâneo. Núcleo Contemporâneo comprising the largest part, physical part of the exhibition. They occupy both the central pavilion at the Giardini and the Corderia and the Artiglieria of the Arsenale, as well as open areas, both in the Arsenale and the Giardini, and special attention was given to the open areas. We have 4 works installed in the Giardini, in the open areas, as well as a number of works in the Arsenale. The Núcleo Contemporâneo has a focus on 4 subjects, from the subject of the foreigner, which is of course connected to the émigré and the expatriate and the refugee and the diasporic subject. I unfold into the notion or the subject of the queer, because the queer is of course the stranger. That's the first meaning of the word queer, calling attention again to these proximities between estranho and estrangeiro, straniero, estranei, in Portuguese and Italian and French and Spanish, right? So that's the second subject of interest, and a focus of the Núcleo Contemporâneo. The third subject is the outsider artist, which in turn is connected to the folk artist, the self-taught artist, and the artista popular. And the fourth subject is the indigenous artist, as the indigenous artist is often treated as a foreigner in his or her own land. I myself feel connected to all these themes. I have been a foreigner and in different times of my life, living abroad, traveling with a third world passport, which poses its own challenges, but also having had the privilege and the fortune to travel abroad and to live and study abroad as a young adult. I'm also a queer man, so I thought that was something that informed very much my interest in the queer in this exhibition. And I'm coming from a country and a culture where the artista popular, the self-taught artist, and the indigenous artist and indigenous art and culture play an important role, both in Brazil and Latin America, I would say. As it has been said, I am the first Latin American curator of this prestigious exhibition, the second curator from the Global South after the late, great Ocui and Wezor in 2015, but in fact the first one living and based in the Global South. So I decided to focus my exhibition and my research in this part of the world, and thinking about the exhibition in a very strategic manner, because we know how the Biennale offers extraordinary visibility for the artists, and often it's a turning point in the artist's career or in the perception of an artist that is no longer alive. And this I thought very strategically. And that, in fact, reflects on my putting together a núcleo histórico for the exhibition. Núcleo histórico features, in fact, many more artists than the núcleo contemporâneo, but the núcleo histórico is actually concentrated on 3 rooms and rather densely installed rooms where artists appear with a single work only. Whereas the núcleo contemporâneo, as some of you may have seen, the artists have larger presences or appear with a single large-scale work, either multiple works or a single large work. The núcleo histórico, my research was then focused on so-called modernism in the Global South, particularly in the rooms devoted to abstraction and to portraits and the representations of the human figure, which are featured in the Central Pavilion. Exhibiting artists who worked in the 20th century in Latin America, in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The exhibition has, as I said, 330 artists. It's not really about numbers. Of course, an exhibition is never about numbers, but it's also interesting to consider that we are, with this large number of artists, with my aim in terms of presenting many artists from the Global South, the result is that we have the largest number of artists from several countries and continents in the history of the Biennale. We have the largest number of Africans, the largest number of Latin Americans, of Asians, of Middle Eastern artists, of Arab artists, as well as the largest number of artists from Mexico, from Colombia, from Brazil, from Argentina, from Chile, from Guatemala, from South Africa, from Egypt, from Iraq, the largest number of Maori artists from New Zealand, the largest number of Lebanese artists, as well as the largest number of indigenous artists and queer artists in the exhibition. I would like to also thank very specially once again the artists who have given so much work, so much labor to this exhibition, and really without their participation, without their efforts, their extraordinary efforts, I'm really very, very grateful. Curator, any curator, even in this very privileged position, curator is absolutely nobody without the work of these extraordinary artists. I feel they're all extraordinary artists in the exhibition, and once again, I cannot thank them enough. Thank you very much.
Grazie Adriano Pedrosa.
Thank you, Adriano. I will now invite here on stage Carlo Giordanetti, the CEO for Swatch Art Peace Hotel. As you know, Swatch is a partner of this exhibition. Thank you. Thanks a lot to both the president and the curator for this extraordinary explanation, very moving, I must say. We are participating as main partner of La Biennale, and we have been main partner for many years. Every year it is a great challenge. We like to tell about our connection with the world of art, a connection that dates back to more than 40 years ago. With this year's project, which is in two parts, one in the Arsenale and one in the Giardini, we have selected a number of artists who had already processed in their journey the message that La Biennale is trying to send, these foreigners everywhere. In the Arsenale, when you will visit us, you will find the work of 5 artists who were in residence in Shanghai in our Swatch Art Peace Hotel that has been functioning since 2011. We have hosted more than 500 artists from different countries. They have worked there, and they have come to Venice with their works, telling part of their being foreigners. The first is a couple of Argentinian artists, Chiacchio and Giannone. As many of the other works you will see in the Corderie, they have worked with textile, on broidery and patchwork, and with their installation they invite to a dialogue between the viewer and themselves and their family, which is a queer family. The second artist, Yanan Wu, is a Chinese artist who tells about 3 different ways of being strange, different, foreigner, with a very subtle provocation, a very direct, in some cases, softer provocation in other cases, a criticism to part of the Chinese society somehow, but also a criticism to some attitudes we find in contemporary world. The third is an Israeli artist, Maya Gelfman. She describes herself as a nomadic artist. She left Israel years ago. She has a more traditional technique with an installation made of 4 different works. She opens a window on the world, in particular on the city of Shanghai, as she experienced it. And then we have Luo Bi, a Chinese artist, a video artist, who with her videos is telling us about the relation and the parallel between nature that is trodden over by ourselves, human beings, and part of the female nature, even equally trodden over. It is a subliminal message that has a romantic and touching side. And we close with Juan Pablo Chipe, a Mexican artist who grew at the border between Mexico and the United States, and he tells about his dual nature with a work that describes an icon of the American pop art, Marge, but with the face of Frida Kahlo, who is an icon in the Mexican culture. And again, a provocation that can be seen both ironically or in a more deep, with a more deep sense. In the Giardini, we have invited a Japanese artist, Verdi, who is present there with a great statue of one of his favorite characters, welcoming, embracing, dynamically embracing the viewers, but who wears a T-shirt with a provocative message. This is our presence in the exhibition of this year. We are moved and we are thrilled to be here for the opening. Thank you.
Grazie Carlo Giordanetti.
Thank you, Carlo Giordanetti. Before opening to the Q&A session for the curator, I would like to thank the press that is present this year, even more numerous. The accredited press representatives amount to 4,300 journalists, out of which 2,850 are international, of the international press, 77%. Thank you for your work. If you have questions for the curator. Enrico Dantucci, Quotidiano del Nord-Est. Two questions. One is both for the president and the curator, and one instead is just for the curator. The first is, the president mentioned this in his presentation. We heard yesterday declarations by the curator as well. Apart from the situation in the Pavilion of Israel, the closing to protest against the current situation, the hostages and the ceasefire, we have Poland that has devoted its pavilion to the war in Ukraine. We have Russia that has reopened its pavilion, hosting a friend country, Bolivia. There is a clear political connotation in this exhibition that somehow influences the exhibition. And I would like to try and understand what is the stance of the Biennale in this sense. Is it something inevitable? Is it something La Biennale should have a voice in? And the other question for the curator instead is, in this exhibition, we see a prevalence of paintings and textile art. Is this the result of the works of the artists? Is this their expressive language of many of the artists selected? Or is it a choice of yours, Mr. Pedrosa, in this sense?
I feel comfortable answering your second question. The first section is question is more directly to the institution of La Biennale. I myself am not responsible nor oversee the national representations, the country sections, and I don't feel comfortable making comments in this particular setting as it's so institutional regarding that. I can say just in very general terms that, of course, politics are always reflecting in every exhibition, in every Biennale, but I think especially so here in Venice, which is perhaps the last Biennale that still works with the model of national representations, right? Regarding the prevalence, I'm not sure if it's a prevalence, I haven't really calculated in that manner, but regarding, let's say, the strong presence of painting and textiles, of course, I'm the curator of the exhibition. I am selecting the artists in the exhibition, and I am mostly selecting the works in the exhibition, although there are some works that I have commissioned, but we are always in very close dialogue. I'm always in very close dialogue. Me and my artistic organizers are in close dialogue with the artists when they're preparing the exhibition. So, of course, this reflects the curator's selection, but of course also the artist's work, but only the artists that have been selected by myself and invited to participate in the exhibition, right? I mean, I can't tell you if this reflects an entire panorama of contemporary art. I couldn't say that, perhaps not, because I have a focus in the Global South. And then I have, of course, it's not even reflecting an entire panorama or entire landscape of contemporary art, even in these countries with such a large number of participants. But it does reflect the choice of the curator. That is always the case in exhibitions such as this one, that do have a curator organizing them.
Buongiorno, sono Manuela.
Good morning, Manuela Gandini, La Stampa. I would like to ask the curator, what were the parameters that you have used to choose the artists, besides the fact that they come from the Global South? I myself have noticed this prevalence of traditional forms of art. We've seen La Biennale with the avant-gardes, with post-avant-gardes, with trans-avant-gardes. I wonder whether this direction, this vision, is a vision for the future, because I think there is no communication, no critical communication about the conditions the invited artists come from.
Yes, I think we have artists working with different media. We have artists working with painting, many artists working with video. I think it's one of the largest presentations of video works, installation works, sculptural works, outdoor works. So, but we do have also a large presentation of painting and textiles and drawings, in fact. We also, as I said, have a large presentation of, it's interesting that you mentioned the trans avant-garde, because we have a large presence also of trans artists and queer artists and indigenous artists. I also feel that each Biennale is always reinvented, hopefully in a very radical manner. Whatever this radicality is taking us, it can take us to many different points. I think each curator will bring their own view and their own selection, and hopefully the Biennale can be invented in a completely different way and responding to different contexts and different propositions over, the years. I always recall Ralph Rugoff's exhibition in 2019, where there were only living artists in the exhibition. Now, of course, my exhibition has a large number of artists that are no longer alive, but I'm not opposing the exhibition that Ralph Rugoff has done in 2019. I think one exhibition should be, as I said, in the name of diversity, in the name of plurality, in the name of polyphony. One exhibition, one Biennale should be very different from the other, right? So hopefully in 2 years' time, someone else will come in and propose a very different exhibition with its own radicality. I think we do have our own radicality here in many different ways. So I think we'll see what will come. I think Cecilia Lemani also did an exhibition, a wonderful exhibition with many historical positions, with her own radicality, with such a strong presence of women artists. In the past edition, I was focusing on a very strong presence of artists from the Global South. But yes, I think they're all, but also a strong, we have artists in the Nucleo Contemporaneo, So, yeah, I think hopefully we'll have a very different and a very radical exhibition in 2 years' time, quite distinct from this one. It's not about continuation, I think. It's really about plurality. But one Biennale does not oppose the next one or the previous one, right? I think one has to really seek the specificity of the project. In terms of the criteria for choosing artists, I did work with very specific sort of starting points and criteria, right? The Nucleo Contemporaneo has a focus on the queer and the foreigner and the indigenous and the self-taught. So this is the starting point in terms of criteria, right? I'm interested in these 4 subjects in the exhibition. In fact, I often see that biennales here and elsewhere in the past, perhaps not the case of the last one, but I often see certain frameworks and titles that are quite open-ended and quite inclusive, that actually any artist could fit in that category. So I think this is not happening so much in my Núcleo Contemporâneo, for example. I was interested in these 4 subjects. In terms of selecting the actual artists, I mean, it's not, of course, not any self-taught artists or indigenous artists or queer artists that's, or artists that are participating in the Núcleo Contemporâneo. It's a question that comes up quite a lot. Oh, how do you select the artists? I'm always looking, as curators often do, always looking for singularity, for complexity, for relevance, for something that calls my attention, right? I only have my own eyes and my own life experiences and my own knowledge, informed, in fact, by, or helped quite a lot by the 2 artistic organizers that work with me in the research as well. But that's the only, well, it's the only thing I have at hand. And also many other colleagues have helped me, suggesting artists for the exhibition, but that's the criteria. It's singularity, it's complexity, it's relevance. I can't tell you more than that in terms of only an artist that, of course, within the context of the indigenous and the queer, the self-taught and the foreigner, right? But I can't tell you a more palpable criteria than that. It's something that, of course, surprises me, and I cannot, you know, predict exactly what I say, what I see, you know, so these are the criteria. Grazie.
Hi, Anna Rieck, Public German Television. I have a question. How do you expect the Biennale to change with a president that was nominated by a post-fascist prime minister? Do you think this is going to affect the Biennale in the future? And of course, I would love to hear from the president how he's planning to change the Biennale.
Is this question for me? Yeah. I can't say. I mean, I really cannot say. I think each president brings their own contribution and their own outlook, and they in turn select. I don't know who will be selected, and yes. So for the other curators, there's many artistic directors, no? In many different sectors. So it's difficult for me. I can't predict that.
Thank you.
The Biennale has an interesting, something interesting happens often because it has so many events, right? In dance, in theater, in music, in art, in architecture. And presidents might stay 2 years, right? They can stay longer, but 4 years. But often there is a president that appoints a curator, and the following president will actually preside over that project. So that was the case of Roberto Cicuto, for example, who appointed me, but is no longer president, and also Cecilia Lemani. Cecilia Lemani was appointed by the previous director, president, and Roberto Cicuto presided over her Biennale. So it's something that happens as well. No? It's not just a Biennale Arte, there are many other festivals happening.
Hello, thank you. I'm Nancy Nesbitt, and I represent the New Art Examiner out of London, and I also represent New Art Lantern that's out of the US. My question regards your speaking of indigenous populations that often cross national borders. We've just been to the Mongolian exhibit, and they treated Chinese Mongolia, but they did not treat Russian Mongolia, of course. But it's the same ethnic population to a degree. So in speaking of, you used the word polyphony, but much more a one voice of an ethnic population. How do you treat that as far as the Biennale goes, which really relies on national borders, but treating that kind of population that crosses borders but is more identified as one?
Right. I think this emphasis on the national border is really in the countries section, which, again, I'm not responsible for. I'm responsible for the international exhibition. And of course, with this focus on the foreigner, we have often artists, not just indigenous artists, but other artists who live in, were born in one country and have a passport from another country, and in fact live in a third country. New Yalter, for example, the Golden Lion, she was born in Egypt. She considers herself Turkish, but she's living in France, in Paris, since the 60s, right? The other Golden Lion as well, Ana Maria Maiolino, born in Calabria and lived in Venezuela, and now has been based in Brazil since the 60s as well. And she considers herself Brazilian, so this happens quite a lot. In terms of the indigenous population, I can mention, and I think indigenous art has a very strong presence in the exhibition. It opens and greets the visitor both at the facade of the central pavilion, as well as the very iconic first room in the Corderie of the Arsenale. In the Corderie, we have the Maori collective Matahu, and in the facade of the central pavilion, we have the collective Maku, the Movimento dos Artistas Runicuim, the Runicuim artists from the western part of the Brazilian Amazon. But Runicuim, for example, I mean, just responding a little bit to what you say, the Runicuim, they exist, it's a community, also called Kaxinawa. They exist both in the western part of Brazil as well as in Peru, right? But what I am presenting here is the work of a collective that is based in Jordão, in Acre, in a state of a Brazilian state in the north, in the western part of the Amazon. And also the Yanomami, we have two Yanomami artists, Taniki Yanomami and Joseka Yanomami. They live and are based in Brazil, in the eastern part of the Brazilian Amazon, but Yanomami also, they exist both in Brazil, in the north of Brazil, as well as in the south of Venezuela. So here you have two communities that are in fact crossing borders, right? And the language crosses borders, the Yanomami language and the Runicuim language, right? Last edition, we had here with Cecilia Lemani, we have the participation of Sheranawi, who is a Yanomami artist from the Venezuelan side, right? And now we have two Yanomami artists from the Brazilian side, right?
Chiudiamo qui la conferenza stampa.
We can close here the live press conference. We thank you for being here and enjoy the exhibition. Thank you.